Miss Lois Lowry, thanks for joining me. Pleased to make your acquaintance. I was a 12-year-old when I read The Giver, and it really did have an effect on me. So, shout out to Miss Frost, my English teacher, Spillane Middle School. But I carried that book with me and that story for a long while, and the movie was also great. So, I guess I just wanted to begin with saying thank you for writing that, because that's a really powerful story.
Thank you. You know, that book was written in 1993, and I can't do the math very quickly, but that's 7 plus 25. That's 32 years ago. And yet, every day, I get mail from people about that book. It's either 13-year-olds who are reading it in school, as you did, but these days, more and more often, it's adults who have thought about it as you have in years. I don't know how old you are, how many years it's been for you.
24 now.
Okay. And so you read it when it was brand new.
I read it a year before the movie came out, and so I
Yeah.
was I was pleasantly surprised to see the film come out as well.
Uh-huh. Anyway, now I'm trying to remember what I was going to say. Oh, so these letters I get are from adults by and large, and they're only now reassessing what they got from that book and rethinking it. And some of them are very profound. I think part of it has to do with the complicated and troubling political times we're in, which are making everybody think more about governance and how it works and the compromises we make. At any rate, I'm delighted to hear that it stayed with you all these years.
It did,
Often,
yeah.
often people return to it because they have kids who are reading it now.
Mm.
Anyway, so it's had a very long life. And when I sat down in 1992 to write it, I don't remember how many books I'd written before that. But overall, now I've written 52. So it probably fell in the middle of that. And I had no way of knowing the effect that it would have. That it would be, it's now published in 30 some different countries. And I hear from kids, even I have talked by Zoom to kids in Iran
Wow.
and Nepal and Japan and everywhere. And all because of that book, which somehow, I couldn't have planned this, somehow has touched an awful lot of people.
Yeah.
I hope in good ways. I'm sorry. I should have in in preparing for our podcast, which I didn't do. So I'm not prepared for this. I should have printed out some so that I could read you some of the things that people have said, things I've tried to respond to. Just yesterday, I was responding to one from a man. I don't know how old he was, but he wasn't a kid. And his letter, email, but essentially a letter, concluded with, "Please help me."
Hmm.
And it puts me in a kind of unnerving position to feel as though people depend on me for something that I'm unfortunately not able to provide outside of a story that they've reacted to.
Yeah. It's really surreal for me to talk to you right now because just a couple years ago on this very podcast, I was talking to my friend Toby about what I love so much about The Giver is, especially when Jonas is escaping, what carries him forward with Gabriel is memory. It is the strength of memories that carries him forward. And that's something that we all have access to.
Yeah,
If we
yeah.
remember, where we've been in our lives and even from the experiences of others, it can give us the strength to continue, to persist.
I think, every book starts out, well, I can't speak for other authors, but for me, every book starts out with a vague concept, not a full blown plot, but just a feeling that I want to write about some concept. And memory was the concept that triggered the writing of The Giver. Another book I wrote, unconnected to the Giver, started with the concept of dreams. And I think memories and dreams are two things that fascinate me because they are so individual. Nobody else has the same memories you do, and nobody else has the same dreams that you do. And so, with that particular book, and that concept came to me because my parents were old at that time. They've long since died, but and my mother, her memories were intact until she died, but my father was losing his, and so I was able to watch that process with the two of them at the same time. My mother, again and again, though she was in a hospital bed at the end of her life in a nursing home, again and again returned and wanted to talk about the things that had most profoundly affected her, one of which was the death of her first child, my sister, my older sister. And those were, of course, very sad memories. My father, at the same time, was not in as poor health as my mother. He was up shuffling around in an assisted living place, but he was losing his memory, and I realized he had forgotten my sister, his first child, and he had forgotten the days, the weeks surrounding and leading up to her death. And in forgetting that, he had made himself, not that he did it on purpose, made himself very comfortable. He didn't have to think about or relive or remember those terribly sad days. And so it's something that affects all of us, as you were just saying. We all have this storehouse of memories on which we form our future, and in various ways. Goodness, now I'm going back to all that, remembering myself, as I'm sure you have from time to time.
Yeah, I feel like that's why I write, and I would imagine that's also why you write as well. It's because you want to perhaps immortalize those memories. You don't want them to
Or
just disappear.
my very first book, okay, going way back now, 1977 was my first book. I had been a writer for adults, and a publisher contacted me and asked if I would consider writing a book for young adults. And I had 4 children of my own, but it had never occurred to me to write for kids. But with that invitation from a publisher, to which I replied, well, I'll give it a try. And they didn't tell me what to write, but I sat down and realized as I began to think and put words on paper, this predates computers, so I'm sitting at a typewriter. I took the same event that I've just been talking about, and I realized that I had been telling this story to myself for many years, and it was the death of my sister, the thing that had most profoundly affected me as a young person. And I think what we do is retell and retell. Not, you said to immortalize, and there's some of that, but I think it's partly to explain, to try to make sense of it, to figure it out. And so that turned out to be my first book. But at any rate, as you said, that's something that propels us forward for good or bad.
Because you've written so many works, what do you think about the idea that what you write might actually come true? or is that just superstitious thinking?
Oh my goodness. Uh, I had never asked myself that question. I think it's probably inevitable that, I mean, I've written several books and I've just finished writing one that is not yet published that are set in a future time. And so some of those things that we postulate are bound to come true. But I've never thought of it until you asked me the question. I don't think of that as any kind of magical, mystical sort of thing, just a kind of inevitable thing. When you imagine a future, you're going to use your existing knowledge and surroundings and propel them forward. And so some of those things are going to happen. But maybe now that you've alerted me to that, maybe I will avoid writing any truly dystopian books because it might be too dangerous.
Yeah, that's something I've been thinking about for the past year or so, and just again, maybe it's just superstition, but sometimes it's like you write a thing and then maybe you look back and like, wow, that's my current reality. Or you
Yeah,
see something like that in real life, like, huh, I wonder if it was just a coincidence or, as you said, inevitable.
yeah. Probably a little of each, and probably a little of your own making. Uh,
Mm.
in imagining it and creating it, you also, creating it fictionally, you can also go ahead and create it in real life because you've thought about it so much. When I write a book, the one that I have just completed, I've been working on for 2 years. So that's been a part of me, and the creation of that world which exists only in my imagination, but in a future time. I've been living with that. And so I think it's entirely possible that I would go on and shape some of my own future to conform to that world that I've created.
Sometimes it's quick to write a piece of work, and sometimes it takes a while. There's been moments in my own experience where there's something that was really precious to me, but because so much time has passed, I feel a little disconnected from it. Yet I still have this desire to finish it. Looking back at your career, have you ever had experiences like that where there's a work that you really want to get to, but you just feel so disconnected from it?
There have been, I mentioned a few minutes ago that my early books were all written on a typewriter. And then actually, The Giver was the first book that I wrote on a computer, or what I thought was a computer. My daughter, who at the time worked at MIT, told me, Mom, you should be using a computer. And so I bought something. It was very expensive. This was 1992. It was very large, it was very noisy, it was very expensive, and I thought it was a computer, but it was actually a word processor.
Mhm.
And the noisy printer would spit out paper that I had to tear apart. I don't know if you remember those. The pages were all connected, and you tore the pages apart. At any rate, at some time shortly thereafter, I did get a real computer. And back in the earlier days, when I used a typewriter, I didn't have the capacity that I then began to have with a computer to store partially written works. I mean, you could keep pieces of paper, of course, but now I could. It took me a while to figure out how to use a computer, and then I realized I could have these folders, and I could put my beginnings of a manuscript in there, and there it would be. And I could go back in a year or 5 years or 10 years, and it would still be there. And I began to do that because I often have ideas or fragments of things that when I start working on them, they disappear, they dissipate. And I've learned to keep those. And some of those I have gone back to after even some years, and others are still waiting in various files located in my computer in a folder called All My Stuff. There it is. And some of them will die when I do, and somebody will take my computer and scrub it clean, and those things will be gone. But others have waited there for me. And maybe when I started them, the time wasn't right, and then times change, and it becomes the right time for them.
Yeah. From everything I've seen about you, you seem to be an author who's very much at peace with writing. Like, for example, as I mentioned, sort of the preciousness that I might have, you seem to be, it doesn't seem like that is something that bothers you. Is that accurate?
You need to ask me that again because I'm not sure what you're asking. Does what bother me?
Um, well, you seem to be someone who, I think you had said something one time where you don't cling to what you put into those pages.
Oh, okay. I certainly don't think of them as masterpieces. I suppose no writer does, except the most self-delusional. But when I'm working on a book, and I've just mentioned the past 2 years, I live in that book. It's there in my mind all the time, even though I'm going around and living my life and cooking dinner and being with friends and living a normal life. But the book is always there. The characters of the book seem real to me, and I live with them for that period of time. And then when the book is out of my hands, as this one will be soon, this is not yet even at the publisher. But soon it will be in other people's hands. And I'll still have to make decisions about it. It will go through an editing process, and they'll ask my opinion of the cover design, things like that. But my connection to it will start to fade because the next idea will be beginning to simmer in my mind. So
Interesting.
so I don't, as you say, you use the word cling. I remain fond of those books from the past, but they're no longer in the forefront of my mind. I'm no longer living with them. And sometimes when I get a letter from a kid who's read a book that I wrote 15, 20 years ago, I'll have to go back and think hard before I can recall the details they're referring to, even names of characters, because I've set them aside. They're in another little place in my mind that I have to reopen if I'm called upon, because I am beginning to live by then in the next place, the next world that I will have created.
That's so fascinating to me because for myself, I feel like those worlds kind of exist simultaneously. And so it's
Uh-huh.
like I can't quite put one behind me. They're all kind of, they're there at the forefront altogether. And it
Well,
actually leads me to ask you something else, which is Rick Rubin, he had recently shared a quote online where he said, it's not helpful to be attached to the result being anything like the starting point. And I think that's the biggest thing I've struggled with in writing is being so attached to the inception and then seeing how it changes, until the end and just the frustration of the difference.
uh-huh. I'm trying to remember as you asked that question if I felt any differently in the 50 years ago when I was writing my first books, if that has changed. But I think probably not. It's something I'm able to let go of. And part of that is, I think, because I have written over the years many different kinds of books. So I'm not writing the same kind of book all the time. And that means that I have to step out of world A and take up residence in world B. And so I can't cling to the ones that I'm letting go of.
I think that's so powerful.
Uh-huh.
Yeah. Have you, what were the authors that you grew up reading and that you admired?
Well, I was fortunate, as some children are, to grow up in a house with a mother who read to me, a mother who had been a teacher, and a house that was filled with books, and a mother who took my hand and walked me to the library. So I had access to many different books. And I, as a child, read some of the worst of them because I grew up in the days when there were some very bad books around for children. I'm thinking one particular series that's part of history now, and I don't know who published it, but I thought the author was a person named Laura Lee Hope because that was the name on the book. But it turns out it was just ground out from a publisher, and different editors were each writing one, and there were many of them. And it was about a family with two sets of twins, and the books were called the Bobbsey Twins. So there was the Bobbsey twins at the lake, and the Bobbsey twins on the farm, and the Bobbsey twins go to the city, and all of that. And I loved those books. I loved the familiarity of them, and I knew the family so well by the time I'd read all 22 of them. But looking back, as I have, because I've been asked similar questions to yours, and I've gone back and found some of these old books and reread them, and they are very, in particular, racist.
Mm.
It just astounds me now that such books were published. So fortunately, books of that sort have disappeared, and fortunately too, I didn't absorb that and take it seriously in a way that I might have. And fortunately, also, particularly my mother introduced me to some wonderful books in my childhood, some of which had been published as adult books. I'm thinking in particular of a book called The Yearling, which I read when I was 9 years old. And I read it because my mother, it was an adult book, but the main character was a child, a little boy, but the book had beautiful illustrations, paintings, probably only 6 in the book, full page paintings by the illustrator N.C. Wyeth. And so I knew what the child in the book looked like, and he looked like me. He was skinny and very blonde and blue-eyed, and that was me. And his name was Jody. So it was the first book I read that introduced me to real life, as opposed to the happy, cheerful lives of people in children's books, typically of that time. This family was very poor. They lived on a very poor farm in western Florida, and the child in the book had a very close friend who died in the book. I mean, that took me by surprise. I'd never read a book in which a child died, but this was a hard-hitting, realistic book. And my mother read it aloud to me when I was 9 years old, and it changed my literate life. It made me not want to go back to not only the Bobbsey twins, but Nancy Drew, who was out solving mysteries. It made me immigrate to books that were more beautifully written and more deeply felt. Another one that I read at about the same time, 10 years old, also published for adults, was called A Tree Grows in Brooklyn. And the main character was a girl. I was attracted to these books because the main character, though they were adult books, the main character was someone my age. And in this case, again, it was such a different life from mine. A Tree Grows in Brooklyn is set in the slums of an immigrant population in Brooklyn, New York. And it's teeming with characters and realistic things that were beyond my understanding, but nonetheless that I could feel. So those were the two books that I often go back to in my memory as having been profoundly impactful on me. I'm just remembering the first one that I mentioned, The Yearling. In that book, the boy is out with his father. There's a bear that's been menacing their little farm. And the father has his gun and the hunting dogs, and the boy goes with him while he stalks the bear. And they don't, until the end of the book, reach the bear and fight the bear. It's looming there always through the book. But
Hmm.
early on in the book, the father is bitten by a rattlesnake. Or a snake comes out of the bushes, bites the father. And I mean, it's a terribly frightening scene. And the father takes his knife and cuts open his own leg, and there's a deer nearby. I mean, it's a very swampy. I've been to this part of Florida because I love this book so much. I actually went to this area. It's not a tourist location, and there's a deer comes out of the woods, and the father is lying there, and the boy doesn't know what to do, and the father suddenly picks up his gun and shoots a deer. And then he gives his knife to the boy, if I'm remembering correctly, and tells him how to cut it open and take out the liver and puts it on this rattlesnake bite. There must be some truth to that as an old folk remedy. At any rate, then and the boy gets his father home, and the doctor comes, and the father is close to dying. So it's a very tense and profoundly emotional scene. But the boy realizes that the deer who has been killed, had a baby, had a fawn. And the boy goes back and gets the baby deer and brings it home, and his parents allow him to keep it as a pet. He's an only child living in an isolated place, and that fawn becomes so important to him until later in the book, as the fawn grows bigger, it begins to eat the family crops. And the father, who is still laid up recovering from this accident, tells the boy that he has to kill the fawn. He has to take his gun and shoot his own pet. Now I've forgotten where I was going with that description, but you can tell from how I talk about that book how profoundly it affected me, that I still think about. Oh, I know what I was about to tell you. There is an illustration in the book, beautiful painting. The father is lying in bed. It's dark. The light in Wyeth's paintings is beautiful, and the father, you can see his head, just above the coverings, and you can see how ill he is. The doctor is there, sitting in a corner, asleep, and the boy is sitting on the floor, leaning on the side of the bed. And as I say, I was only 9 years old reading this. And each of the illustrations had a caption. And the caption on this painting was, "The vigil was in his hands."
Hmm.
I don't even now know exactly what that means, but certainly when I was 9 years old, I didn't know what it meant. And I wondered, it didn't occur to me to ask my mother. I wondered what the word vigil meant. And I kept looking at that painting. The boy's hands are clasped in his lap. It said the vigil was in his hands. And I thought, what is small enough? What is that vigil? And I used to recreate that painting in my own bedroom. I used to sit beside my bed, leaning with my hands around. I'd have a little crayon in my hands. That was the vigil. And I would sit there reproducing that painting and thinking about that moment. And I think that's what a good piece of literature does. It allows you to enter a moment, enter a life, enter another life different from your own. Place yourself there and feel those feelings that those people, fictional people, have. The book that I've just finished writing takes place in a time when books no longer exist and imagination no longer exists. Similarities to The Giver. It's kind of an extension of The Giver, and at any rate, so now I'm thinking about that, going back into that book. But
That was beautiful, by the way. You sharing that. And I wonder, do they kill the bear in the end?
of course, and here's an interesting thing. A number of the books that I've written have been humorous. Not the ones I've described here, not the ones we've talked about, but I've gone back and forth with different types of things. And one time I picked up a book of interviews with authors, and one of the authors was a Canadian author whom I've admired. He's dead now, but his name was Robertson Davies. And there's an interview with him, and he has asked the question of how he is able to combine, to use humor in his books, which often deal with tragic themes. And his answer, which he didn't explain, but boy, a light bulb went on over my head, because his answer was humor is just a way of sending the dogs in a different direction. And I thought immediately of Jodi's father in The Yearling. And they go out again and again with those hunting dogs to try to find that bear. And you become scared for them and excited. And again, they send the dogs in a different direction, or they don't get the bear that day. And that's what I have done in some books that purport to be lighthearted and humorous, but they deal with serious themes in ways that send the dogs in a different direction. Because, for example, I've written a book in which a child is worried about her parents' marriage. Okay, and but it's not a book that is going to be a serious treatise on divorce and the crumbling of the American family. It's a book that is lighthearted, and the family is intact and healthy. But it goes and pokes at that bear, but it sends the dogs in a different direction, because it's not the kind of book that is going to confront that particular bear. In The Yearling, yes, at the end of the book, and there is a painting that illustrates the battle with the bear, and the bear is killed at the end. But the author was a woman, has been working toward that for 400 pages.
Wow. I have to check that one out. That sounds very interesting. And the idea of the bear is still looming. I think that says something about life as well, that we all kind of have a bear that's
Yes,
looming.
yes, there are many bears out there, and they loom, and we fear them, but it's not always the right time to battle with them. But we
Yes.
are there. Yeah.
Yes. Yeah. No, that's beautiful. And you seem so passionate about sharing that. Thank you. That was really nice.
Yeah, thank you.
Yeah. When it comes to writing all the books that you've written, The Giver, I imagine, is your most popular one. Before that, though, did you feel like your works were communicating with a lot of people, or did you notice a shift?
Uh, it depended on which book. I'm thinking back now. When I mentioned that I'd been a writer for adults, and I was not writing fiction so much. I was writing for magazines, but my goal was to write fiction. But I thought of myself as writing for adults eventually. And then when I was asked to write a book for young people and did so, and that's the book I wrote dealing with the death of my sister, though I wrote it as fiction. Almost immediately, I began to get letters. This was long enough ago that they were actual letters. I would have to open the envelope and write back and put a stamp on it. But I began to see and to become newly aware of the effect that a book can have on young people. And I began to see it as an important role that I could play with my one skill, which was writing. I've forgotten the question you asked, where I was going with that.
I was wondering if your books before The Giver
Oh, thank
communicated.
you. Yes, yes. So right away, I began to be aware of the audience and the effect that that particular book had. I went on to write others that were lighthearted or humorous, but that first one had brought it clearly to me, the profound effect a book can have. But it wasn't until I wrote one 4 years before The Giver, which was called Number the Stars. That one has been as popular or close to as popular as The Giver. And that was the one that is still out there at this moment in the hands of movie makers and translated into 30 languages. So The Giver was not the first one to have that effect. The Number of the Stars was very different. Instead of being a dystopian or a futuristic book, it was set in 1943 in Denmark, so it was historical fiction. But it dealt with important subjects, and it is still used in, maybe you had to read it in fourth grade. It's used in fourth and fifth grade throughout the United States.
Yeah. Speaking of the movies, I was really surprised that Jeff Bridges was himself very passionate about making The Giver. When you found out about that, do you remember being surprised or did you see it coming?
Uh, I don't remember specifically, but what I do remember is it was over the course of about 15 years that Jeff Bridges had first approached me because his father, Lloyd Bridges, who'd been a very successful popular actor, was getting older. Jeff's kids had brought the book home from school. He saw the picture on the cover of the old man, and he was wanting to direct a movie in which his father would be the star. And that's why he took an interest in The Giver. But it didn't come about. He couldn't raise the money. Of course, it costs a lot of money to make a movie. I'm sorry, I'm looking at you, but I'm also looking over your head out my window where a chipmunk is eating the food in my bird feeder. I want to throw something at him. At any rate, although I talked to Jeff a number of times and he commissioned a screenplay, which I read and met the screenwriter, but the movie didn't get made. And so then it was many years later, and then his father had died. But suddenly he was old enough himself to play the role. And I'm trying to think, he didn't direct it. So I guess he might have been one of the producers. But at any rate, finally the money appeared from Harvey Weinstein's company. But we'll draw the veil over that. And the movie was made. but he was, you're right, he had become very passionate about the book. And he was very, unlike many movie makers, he was very good about keeping me in the loop. I had no role in the making of the movie, but they did seeking my advice is too strong a phrase. They asked me questions often. Those questions are still in a file folder in my computer, and ask my opinion on things. And then they would sometimes take my advice, and more often not. But it was nice to be included. And then when they were filming it, they filmed it in South Africa, and they invited me over for a week to watch the filming, which was very, very interesting. I've always been interested in filmmaking. I think if I were to have the opportunity, too late now, but if I had ever been able to have the opportunity to work in the filmmaking industry, I've probably maybe have mentioned that I was a photographer. I did the photograph of the man on the cover of The Giver. But if I had the opportunity to work in that realm, I would like to be a film editor. I think the editing process is absolutely fascinating, and it's so much more important than most people realize.
Yeah. I remember hearing and seeing that they kept you close in that project. And I think, at least from what I can see, that's why I felt like it was so good. It felt like it wasn't too different from the book. The adaptation seemed like it worked.
Well, the problem is, a film adapted from a book is never going to be the same as the book. And part of the reason it can't be is because a book can enter the consciousness of the characters,
Hmm.
can be inside the heart, the brain, the thoughts, the passions of the characters. And a movie can't do that. A movie has to show everything. Therefore, you end up, and this is the one thing I didn't like about the movie of The Giver, you end up with a car chase. I so didn't want a car chase in that movie, but nonetheless, they have to keep things moving on the screen. The dialogue, the writing, the words are very unimportant to the movie makers. That's why when I say I'd like to work in the film industry, I don't want to be a screenwriter because those words are not important. And you'll see as they're making the movie, they'll say, "Oh, let's cut that line out. That scene goes too long. Get rid of that line." Writing a book, every line is important,
It is.
and you agonize over every word in every line. In a movie, that doesn't happen. So it's a very different process, and there were things I didn't like about the movie, but there were some things. There was one thing in particular that I thought was better in the movie than in the book, and it was this. In the book and in the movie, the boy has, I don't know, what shall we call him? He is given visions of a sort. He somewhat magically is able to be in a place and experience another set of circumstances. And in the book, when the boy is about to run away to flee the community, the giver, the old man says, I'm going to give you memories of strength and courage. And I've forgotten what form those take in the book. I haven't reread the book in years. But in the movie, same scene, and the giver says, I'm going to give you strength and courage. And then it shows in a quick montage of different familiar scenes. You see, what's his name? Newly let out of prison in South Africa. He went on to be president of I'm forgetting his name.
Nelson
Nelson
Mandela.
Mandela dancing in the street when he comes out of prison. And you see the young man who stands in front of the tanks in Tiananmen Square,
Mhm.
famous scene. And those things are all shown to the boy in the movie and to the audience watching the movie. And it's very moving.
Yeah.
And I couldn't do that in the book. I must have described something, but it had nowhere near the powerful effect that that particular moment in the movie did.
Yes, I know exactly what you're talking about. And that's I think the reason that I love the movie as well as the book is the you get to see those memories. You get to see that montage
Yeah,
and it
yeah,
fills you up. And going back to what I said earlier, the memories carrying strength. And
yeah,
that's you get to see that.
yeah,
Memories literally carry strength.
yeah.
I was wondering, Lois, do you have any closing thoughts? Anything you felt like you wanted to say we can get a chance to, or something on your mind that you wanted to express?
Oh, I think I have. I've been blathering on and on, so the hour has gone by very quickly, but I have nothing in particular, unless you have something more you want to ask me.
I guess one last thing I'd like to ask is do you have any one piece of advice for the future generation of writers?
You know, every writer, when asked to give advice to young writers, always says the same thing, which is to read. And of course, that's both obvious but also important. I'm sorry I'm not wearing my shirt that says I'm with the band, Banned. My advice for anybody involved in literature in any form in the future is to beware of the suppression of knowledge that you and I and others try to impart in books to guard the safety of literature, which is in danger, I think.
Thank you for saying that. I appreciate that. Um, well, that's the episode. And yeah, I appreciate you joining me. I wanted to ask you. You said you were going to a concert next week. Who's playing?
Um, the I'm in a very rural part of Maine, and it's a summer vacation spot for many people. But in the summer, for 5 weeks, there's a chamber music series, and they bring in musicians from around the country. And some of
Mm,
those musicians stay in my house. I've just said goodbye to a Ukrainian clarinetist.
wow.
And next week, I have a Romanian cellist staying in my house. So the concerts are every Tuesday night, so that's where I'll be going.
Yeah. I wonder what kind of music you grew up listening to because you've seen so many different zeitgeists.
I'm a classical music lover. However, I will tell you, and I told the professional clarinetist who just left yesterday morning. I'd been out in my car, and when I told him this, when I came back in, he was quite astonished. I keep my radio, what's a car radio called? Sirius, Sirius. It has a name. It's not the usual AM FM. Any rate, I keep it tuned to the channel called Willie's Roadhouse, which plays country music. Well, you're in Texas, you know country music. Jeff Bridges, incidentally, is a musician, guitar singer. He did a wonderful movie in which he played a country singer.
Mm,
So that's just a little sideline of my music life. And maybe I will close by telling you an anecdote that encompasses that.
sure.
I have only once been stopped for speeding, and the policeman who stopped me told me I was going 52 in a 35-mile zone. And indeed, I had been. So I apologized, and I said to him, I'm sorry, I wasn't paying any attention. I was in a hurry to get home, and I was going too fast. I was just singing along with my radio. And he said, what were you, picture his reflecting sunglasses and his hat and his gloves. And he said, what were you singing? And I said, pour me another tequila, Sheila, and take off that red satin dress. And he started to laugh. And he said, ma'am, I'll just give you a warning.
That's a good one.
Yeah. Okay. So we're done, and you get to go back and climb. What mountain is that behind you?
That is Mount Rainier in
Okay.
Olympia, Washington, but I'm not there.
But it's very beautiful behind you.
It is
Yeah.
indeed. Yes. Yes.
Okay.
Thank you. I suppose until next time, I
O-
really appreciate your time.
Okay. Thank you. It's
Take
been
care.
okay. Bye bye.
Bye.